Welcome back, guys. This is the second video in my Blu-ray Collection update series. Probably one more video coming after this one because, again, I have a lot of catching up to do. If you haven't seen part one of my update series, check out the link below, but you don't really have to watch these in any order because they're not in any order. First up, we have Psycho 3, starring Anthony Perkins, once again returning to his role as the iconic Norman Bates. Psycho 2, which I also own, is actually an incredible sequel and a really solid horror film and a kind of a psychological thriller in and of itself. Psycho 3, Steve Jobs, directed by Danny Boyle and starring Michael Fassbender as the titular character, Steve Jobs. An amazing movie, script by Aaron Sorkin, extremely powerful, combative dialogue, astounding performances. This was one of my favorite films of that year. Definitely check out Steve Jobs if you haven't had the chance. Charlie Chaplin's The Kid. Now, this is, of course, from the Criterion Collection, which if you watched the first video in this series, you knew I rant and rave about the Criterion Collection, so I will spare you this time around, but this is a beautiful transfer, lots of fun special features, really neat cover art. I'm a collector of the Criterion released Charlie Chaplin films. They're, again, beautifully restored. They look almost brand new and really capture every nuance within those films. If you've never watched a Charlie Chaplin film, you are missing something in life. Denis Villeneuve's Sicario. This was probably in my top 5 favorite films of 2014 or 15, whenever it came out. Amazing performances from its leads. Beautiful, I mean gorgeous cinematography by Roger Deakins. This is a pulse-pounding, edge-of-your-seat thriller if there ever was one. John Carpenter's Escape from New York, the special collector's edition from Shout Factory. Beautiful transfer. I'm a huge fan of John Carpenter's original Escape from New York. It is cheesy wonderfulness at its best. It's gritty, it's dirty, it's, again, kind of done on the cheap and featuring a fantastic lead performance from Kurt Russell. Escape from LA, the long-awaited sequel to Escape from New York. Now, say what you will about this film, I still enjoy it. No, it's not great by any stretch of the imagination. This movie is pretty bad, actually, but again, it has the cheesy goodness factor going for it. This was truly done on the cheap. Many of the special effects simply don't hold up today. In fact, I think they barely held up at the time the film was released. But if you're a fan of the original, you have to check out Escape from LA, even though there's a good percentage you might just, regret that. Jean de Florey and Manon of the Spring. This is a double feature Blu-ray. One of my favorite films of all time. Very powerful, wonderful performance from Daniel Auteuil and Gerard Depardieu. My pronunciation of those names kind of... The Stuff from Arrow Video. Now, this is a studio that I've just started to delve into. They take old, definitely B horror and sci-fi films, cheesy films from the 70s and 80s, and they restore them and give them the royal treatment, complete with custom cover art and custom special features. This is a gorgeous transfer. This is a fun little movie about killer ice cream. That's all you need to know. George Miller's Mad Max Fury Road, one of the greatest sci-fi action films of recent memory. This movie is just non-stop, again, edge of your seat entertainment. Fantastic performances from Charlize Theron and Tom Hardy, of course, the titular character, Mad Max, replacing Mel Gibson, the original Mad Max. I would go as far as to say this is probably my favorite of the franchise. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 from the late, great Tobe Hooper. This is the now beloved, but at the time hated sequel to the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. This, of course, is a beautiful release from Shout Factory, custom cover art, wonderful special features, fantastic transfer. Now, this film, again, upon original release, was just not the movie people were expecting. They saw the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which was a gritty, terrifying grindhouse feature, and Tobe Hooper really flipped the script with the sequel and made essentially what is a comedy horror parody of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. This is wonderful, it's sick, it's disgusting, it's over the top. Highly recommend you check it out. Samurai Cop. What can I say? Tales from the Crypt presents Demon Knight. This was the first of a couple Tales from the Crypt feature films, and probably the best of the two. You have William Sadler, Jada Pinkett Smith, and Billy Zane in it. It is basically the story of a man being chased by the devil, played by Billy Zane, and he gets held up in this small hotel full of a bunch of strangers, all running from something with seedy pasts, and chaos ensues when the devil brings his army of demons to attack. It's a fun, gore-filled practical effects heavy horror film. So I have a very soft spot for this in my heart. This is a beautiful release from Shout Factory once again. Some fun special features. Excellent transfer. Tales from the Crypt presents Bordello of Blood. Now, while I still enjoy Bordello of Blood, I admit this is like the least if not most hated of the two. This just takes it in a different direction. It's much more comedy heavy, even though the first one has a lot of levity. This just takes it to a whole new level. It's a lot more silly. It stars Dennis Miller, but I think he's good in the movie. I think it's actually kind of funny when it needs to be funny, but it's not really scary. It doesn't work on the level of a horror film, and the plot is kind of stupid. So if you like your horror movies with a lot of cheese, then you just might enjoy Bordello of Blood. Life Force. Now, this is actually based on a book called Space Vampires, so that tells you what it's all about. This is a great little British-produced horror film from the late 1980s or mid-1980s, and it's fantastic. Fantastic special effects, great matte paintings. It just encapsulates everything I love about 80s and 70s horror sci-fi filmmaking. They feel gritty, they feel real and tangible. They're never slick, they're never too convincing on the visual level, but they're always interesting to look at. This is no different. The plot is a little meandering. You don't really care about the characters, so again, you're really just watching this one for the craziness of it all. The Last American Virgin. This is a little teen sex comedy from the early 1980s from Canon Films. I own it almost as a piece of history. I don't think the film is particularly great, but it does kind of have that early 80s gritty kind of made on the fly feel, which all of Canon's films had. If you don't know about Canon Films, there is an entire documentary on the subject. They were basically a film studio that a couple of guys from Israel who got together and just said, hey, let's make movies. And they did make a bunch of movies. Horribly financed, bad decisions, poorly marketed. Even though some of those movies today, to me, still are watchable for, again, their cheesy goodness, they're never really considered good by anybody. So this is really for the B-movie purist, but if you like to own a slice of history, I definitely recommend picking up the Canon Films. They are definitely a lesson in failure. The Prowler. This is a nice little 1980s horror film. Wonderful practical gore makeup effects by the great Tom Savini, and that's really the draw with this movie for me. If you remove the practical effects, it's really just kind of another standard 80s slasher movie with nothing really special going on, but it is the kills that make this worth the watch. And if you're a fan of Tom Savini's work and you haven't seen The Prowler, you're missing some of his best work. Black Christmas. This is directed by the late Bob Clark of Baby Geniuses fame. This is a nice little horror film from, I believe, the late 1970s. It kind of followed the Halloween trend of, teenage girls being stalked by a killer. It's not as great as some of the better slasher films that came out around that period, but it still holds up today because I think of its unique tie to Christmas. It's really kind of, again, made on the cheap, gritty feel, and it looks very good on Blu-ray with some fun special features. This is a special collector's edition. Once again, definitely check it out if you're a fan of those types of horror films. Dracula, Prince of Darkness from Hammer Horror Films, starring the late, great Christopher Lee. This is, again, just another example of Hammer Horror doing it right. It's cheesy, but classy at the same time. They always seem to strike that balance really, really well. Beautiful Blu-ray transfer. Definitely check out the Hammer Horror Films if you haven't had a chance yet. The Howling 2 from Shout Factory. Now, this definitely falls in the category of so bad it's good. So go in knowing that. It has a decent cast, including Christopher Lee, but it doesn't hold a candle to the original Howling, which was hugely innovative in the area of practical makeup effect, especially in the werewolf transformation. This one just throws all of that out the window. It is utterly bizarre. It is far too 80s, but it is a hell of a good time. David Cronenberg's Scanners from the Criterion Collection. Really awesome cover. Really interesting special features. This movie, while not my favorite Cronenberg film, that would probably be The Fly, is still right up there with his best. It is disturbing. It is philosophical. It really makes you think, and it really shocks you at certain moments. It's not for everybody. It's definitely in the category of weird movies, but if you're a fan of Cronenberg's work, then you have to see Scanners. Shoah from the Criterion Collection. Now, this is a near 9-hour documentary on the Holocaust, but it's not like most Holocaust documentaries you've probably seen where it's lots of archival footage, etc., etc. This is a movie that actually goes to the survivors and follows them as they walk back to the camps, as they sit in their homes and talk about their experiences, how their families were killed, what they had to do to survive in the ghettos and in the camps. This is a heart-wrenching documentary, but beautifully made. It was made in the 1980s. It's a gorgeous transfer from Criterion Collection with some really solid special features, because the story behind the scenes of finding these people making this documentary is just as interesting as the documentary itself. If you haven't seen Shoah, especially if you're looking to kind of brush up on your Holocaust history, Shoah is probably the first place you should start. Seven Samurai, directed by Akira Kurosawa. This is, of course, one of the greatest films of all time, definitely in my personal top 10. It's beautifully transferred by the Criterion Collection once again. It is an epic, it's enthralling. It's a movie that explores the characters and puts them in fantastic peril and amazing action sequences. It is beautifully filmed by Kurosawa and his team. It's just one of the best films you'll ever see. If you're thinking of staying away from it because it's, 3.5 hours long in black and white and in Japanese, you are doing yourself a major disservice. This movie is an important piece of history. It was so influential for so many films beyond it, the least of which was The Magnificent Seven. So I highly recommend checking out Seven Samurai, and I highly recommend even more picking it up on Criterion Blu-ray. The original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, once again directed by Tobe Hooper. Again, this was a gritty grindhouse, down and dirty, independent horror film, really, when it came out. It was made on a shoestring budget, and it shows, but to great effect in the film because it gives it this kind of air of realism. You really feel the sticky summer heat in Texas in this movie, and it just adds to the intensity and the horror and the disgustingness of it all. If you've never seen the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, sit down tonight with some friends, have a big bowl of popcorn, maybe a couple of beers if you're over 21, and enjoy yourself. E.T. the Extraterrestrial, directed by Steven Spielberg. Enough said. It Follows. This is a cool little steelbook edition of the film. I was a huge fan of this movie. It was a little indie horror film that I think has found a following since its original release, but if you haven't had a chance to check it out, it's retro horror filmmaking at its finest. Sam Raimi's The Evil Dead, the original Evil Dead, on Steelbook Blu-ray. The film looks great. It's still just as fun as ever. This is one of the most over-the-top, silly, zany, crazy horror films you'll ever see. If you're looking for a good time and you don't mind being just a little bit grossed out and weirded out at times, you have to see The Evil Dead. Minority Report, based on a short story by Philip K. Dick, once again directed by Steven Spielberg, starring Tom Hanks, a beautiful Blu-ray steelbook. This is a fantastic sci-fi action film from the early 2000s, one of Spielberg's best in the last 15 years, 20 years, oh my god, for sure. And this is a movie I can watch over and over again for its performances, for its ideas, its philosophy, and the beautiful visuals in this film, and it still holds up on every level today. Kingsman: The Secret Service, directed by Matthew Vaughn. Now, this was a big surprise for me. I actually got to see it about a month before it came out back in 2014. At that time, it didn't have a rating assigned to it, so I didn't know it was going to be R-rated, and I hardly knew anything else about it. The trailers looked kind of okay, so I went into this pre-screening, and I was totally blown away by the utter chaos that unlaid itself before me. Matthew Vaughn kills it in this movie. This movie has so much energy. It never loses pace. There's not a dull moment in this film. Highly recommend checking out Kingsman: The Secret Service. Flesh and Blood, directed by Paul Verhoeven, starring Rutger Hauer. This is not a good movie, you guys, in my opinion. I watched it on a recommendation of somebody who I really trust, and sometimes that just doesn't work out. I bought it cold. Even the transfer of the Blu-ray, honestly, is not that good. This is probably one of the few Blu-rays I own that I'm just kind of not very proud to own. But if you're curious, if you're a fan of Rutger Hauer, Paul Verhoeven like I am, you might want to check it out just to have it in your back catalog. Galaxy Quest, on the other hand, is fantastic. I'm sure most of you out there have had a chance to see Galaxy Quest by now. It's extremely popular and was very popular at the time. But it's true what they say. This is like the best Star Trek film never made. It kind of captures the spirit of the thing it's satirizing, which is Star Trek, so well. It also gets the behind the scenes, squabbles and bickering down pat. The performances in the film are fantastic. The special effects are still fun, even though some of them don't hold up. But what this film has going for it more than anything else is heart. You care about the characters, you believe in them, and you want them to succeed in the end, and that is masterful storytelling. Mel Brooks' Spaceballs. This is, of course, a parody of Star Wars. You know, some of the jokes don't always hit, especially today. Humor back in the 80s is a little bit different than humor now, but the performances are so good in it. It's so clever, even though, again, some of the jokes are very screwball, very eye-rolling. It still works on that level as long as you know what you're getting into. If you're a fan of Mel Brooks's work, then you're probably going to enjoy Spaceballs, especially if you're a fan of Star Wars, because it knows where to push the buttons for Star Wars fans and really make them laugh. Lost in Space. I own this purely for nostalgic purposes. This is not a great movie. It has some fun moments. The visuals are interesting, even though the visual effects do not hold up today just because the technology has advanced so much. But it's a fun little relic from my childhood, and I just like to own it. The Babadook. This is one of the greatest horror films to be released in the last 10, 15 years for sure. Not everybody's going to agree with me on that. I think some people will be dissatisfied maybe by the direction the movie takes. I was enthralled the whole time. This movie definitely made me curl up on my couch and put the pillow over my eyes, and that doesn't happen very often, but this movie just does an excellent job of making you feel uncomfortable and uneasy. And look at this really awesome Blu-ray cover. It comes with this neat little slip cover, as you can see here, that actually pops open to create a Babadook pop-up. Now, that's pretty awesome. Christopher Nolan's Interstellar. Love it or hate it, this movie is quite ambitious. I think it doesn't quite work as well as Nolan maybe intended it to work in the end, because it tries to do a lot in under 2.5 hours. And the ideas in this movie are so big, you can make a 40-hour movie on this subject and still not quite cover it. So it's a little overambitious to a fault, but the visuals are stunning, the performances are excellent, and it is truly thought-provoking. And there are moments in the film, especially if you've only watched it for the first time, that are totally going to confuse you, and you may even walk away from the film feeling really just irked and frustrated. But it's a movie that deserves repeat viewings for that very reason, because you pick up more and more each time you watch it. Every time I've watched this film, I've come to appreciate it a little bit more, and I hope one day to see it as an absolute masterpiece. And last but certainly not least, guys, is Watchmen, the collector's edition. This is the ultimate cut, the director's cut, the theatrical cut, all wrapped up into one package. So big that I can't even put it up here because like my face would be blocked. So, you know, Watchmen is one of those movies that people either, again, you know, love or hate. I can understand the people who hate it, and I don't think this is a perfect film at all. It is deeply flawed in certain ways, but I can't help but love it, especially for its visuals. I mean, this is a beautiful looking movie. It is so, on a visual level, faithful to the comic book, or graphic novel rather, that it's based on, that I can't help but have an appreciation for what Zack Snyder and his team really set out to do with this film, even though they don't quite succeed. I'm very much intrigued for the HBO series that is rumored to be coming soon, to see if they maybe can do it a little bit more of a gritty way, maybe take their time more developing the characters, because this movie does miss a little bit of the character development. Even though it is a character-driven film, there's a lot of backstory and nuances to these characters that they just couldn't squeeze into the movie, not even the ultimate cut. And I actually enjoy all three cuts of this movie as well, but let's dive into this thing. So you open it up and you get a digital copy. But behind that, you actually get a hardback copy of the graphic novel itself. And I haven't opened this one yet because I actually already own the graphic novel and I thought this is pretty awesome, so I decided to keep it in its plastic shrink wrap. But the Blu-ray package here itself is worth the value alone because of the inclusion of the graphic novel. If you've never read Watchmen, if you just watch the movie and you're like, that sucked, I'm not gonna, you know, check out the graphic novel. I mean, I've read this probably 4 or 5 times now. It's that good. It is so layered and so deep and so thought-provoking and so clever and so satirical in many ways. There's just so much going on in this graphic novel. Highly recommend checking it out if that's your thing. And then, of course, inside we have the Blu-ray itself, which comes in a nice little fold-out package, has multiple versions of the film, discs with special features. For the price, guys, which I think this is probably under $60. Now, you could probably get it for around $40 because I bought this maybe 1 or 2 years ago. It is worth it. There's so much in here. There's so much to delve into as far as the film and the graphic novel. So for any Watchmen fan, this is a must-have. Well, that is it, guys, for part 2 of my Blu-ray update series. I'll be doing part 3 very, very shortly, and then I'll try and do more regular updates they're out, so I don't have to constantly do these huge magnum opuses. But again, go and comment below and tell me what your Blu-ray collections. What do you think of my Blu-ray collection thus far? Is there anything maybe I've inspired you to go pick out? And what is the most valuable title in your Blu-ray collection? And as always, guys, thank you so much for watching. If you like this video and want to see some more stuff, click like and subscribe below. Until next time, I'm Late Neversol, keeping you movie healthy.